that if a bureaucrat did make those decisions, it would be because they were following ridiculously flawed guidelines given to them by Congress. So this in no way diminishes Congress's control of the purse strings. It just insists on a more accountable process by which we allocate the resources from the purse.
It is easy to see why earmarking is held so dear to so many members. I remember when I first was elected and people began showing up in my office that frankly had not been big supporters of mine. And, you know, all of us that are here, you know, if we're really brutally honest with folks back home, we want to be loved. You know, we put ourselves out there for public acceptance or rejection every 2, 4, or 6 years. And so when people started showing up, being really nice to me, they had not particularly been supporters of mine, and you know, they were really being nice to me, and I thought, what's up here? And then all of a sudden I figured it out. They were all showing up to get their earmarks. And, you know, the people in Missouri, I don't know about Pennsylvania, Senator Toomey, but in Missouri they're very worried about not having earmarks because they've been fed this line all these years, well, if we don't have earmarks, we're not going to get anything. You know, we're not going to get our share. We're not going to get as much as we deserve. Let's just take water, for example. Pennsylvania, this is a good example, because you guys didn't get very much money in water projects either. I don't know how many rivers that you have in Pennsylvania. I should be more familiar with your geography. But, you know, to say that Missouri is a river statement is an understatement. I mean, to say that Missouri is a river state is an understatement. I mean, we have the confluence of the 2 greatest rivers of our country, the Missouri and the Mississippi, in our state. We have major impact in terms of water projects that need to be done in our state because of how prominent water is in the state of Missouri. But yet, we have been way down the line in terms of water projects because we didn't have an appropriator on that committee. Now, we had appropriators on other committees, but not on that committee. So I keep telling the folks at home, if we compete with other states for water projects, we're going to do just fine. And that's the way it's supposed to work. States are supposed to get what they need and not get the benevolence of Washington because they happen to have somebody who's been here long enough to be on the right committee, to have the right chairmanship or have the right ranking committee so that they can get even more. That's not the way this place should run. It's not the right way to spend public money.
Will the Senator yield?
I will.
Senator from Pennsylvania.
Thank you very much. I can tell you how I think a big majority of Pennsylvanians feel about this because I hear from them every day. And sure, there are some folks that would love to resume earmarks because they benefited from them in the past. I think the vast majority of Pennsylvanians, and I would guess of Americans generally, understand that especially at a time when we have reached $15 trillion in debt, when our debt now exceeds the entire size of our economy, when we're running annual deficits of over $1 trillion for the last several consecutive years, and frankly, probably in the years to come, we are in an unsustainable mode right now, and what my constituents want is for us to put ourselves on a viable, sustainable fiscal path, and that means getting spending under control. So I don't think our constituents want us to see how much money we can spend. As you pointed out, they want to see how much we can save, and I think they would overwhelmingly welcome ending a process that clearly leads to wasteful spending.
I think you're right, Senator Toomey, and I hope we get a vote on this amendment. I'm not optimistic about that, but because typically, I mean, let's just be honest. I mean, the vast majority of the leadership in this body have typically been appropriators, and many of them want to go back to earmarking, and this is on both sides of the aisle. As I started to point out before, it was the Republican Armed Services Committee in the House that set aside a slush fund and began, you know, doing earmarking in the Defense Authorization Bill. Now, we were able to stop it, expose it and stop it, but clearly people are having a hard time breaking this habit. So I think this amendment is very important. I'm happy to go toe-to-toe with anyone over the merits of this amendment. I am happy to stand shoulder to shoulder with anyone in this Congress, Republican or Democrat, that is willing to stop this process once and for all. I think this amendment would do it. I hope we get a vote on it, and I will, and if we don't, It won't be the last time I think they'll hear from both of us, Senator Toomey, about our bill and how serious we are about getting it passed. There will come a time that this bill will pass because the American people are on to us. The American people are on to this bad habit. They want it to end, and they will have their way. It may not be today. It may not be this week. But I remind the members of the Senate that it wasn't that long ago that people laughed out loud at me when I said there would be an end to earmarking. They thought that was the silliest joke they'd ever heard. And we've made a lot of progress, thanks to the American people, by the way. The credit should not go to me or Senator McCain or Senator Coburn, who have been working on this for much longer than I have. It should go to the American people that are figuring this out and rising up in record numbers to say we don't like earmarks, stop it. And credit to them for paying attention. I hope they stay on it, and I hope that we will eventually prevail on this important fight.
Well, if the Senator would yield one final time, and I certainly appreciate your kind indulgences here, but I'm newer to this body than you are, and maybe that explains my relative optimism. But I am hopeful that we will get a vote. And if we do get a vote, I am hopeful that it will succeed. And I point to the voluntary moratorium that both parties in both chambers instituted a year ago as a sign that this is increasingly becoming the consensus view among members of both bodies. I don't know if I'm right, but I am hopeful. I'm not going to give up. I agree with you completely. If we don't succeed today, that just means we need to come back on another day when we can succeed, because there's no doubt in my mind that the people of Pennsylvania, and I suspect across America, want us to win this battle and begin to rein in wasteful spending. There's no better place to start than to ban these earmarks. So I thank the gentlelady from Missouri for her leadership and for her work, and I yield.
And I also yield, Mr. President, and thank the Senator for his work on this. This should be the easiest for us to get done. We've got some hard things we've got to do around here that are going to mean sacrifice and changes that are not going to be easy for anyone. This ought to be simple. So let's try to get it done, and I yield the floor.
President, I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Kaka.
Senators McCaskill and Toomey talking about an amendment they've offered that would permanently prohibit congressional earmarks. Congressional Quarterly writes that supporters of earmarking argue that individual members of Congress best understand the needs of their own states and districts. There are a few more hours of voting in Florida's Republican presidential primary. The National Journal reports that Newt Gingrich remains confident that his campaign will continue for months ahead, no matter what happens in Florida. Mr. Gingrich said, quote, "I would say probably 6 months, probably June or July, unless Mitt Romney drops out earlier." Tonight, here on C-SPAN 2, we'll have live results from Florida, including candidate speeches and your phone calls, starting at 8 p.m. Eastern. his State of the Union speech, President Obama asked that lawmakers send him a bill that bans insider trading by members. And that's what the Stock Act, pending here in the Senate, would do. Today, the Congressional Budget Office released its latest budget and economic outlook, projecting that the unemployment rate will remain above 7% until 2015. Other numbers in the report, the projected federal deficit, and an increase in the cost for freezing doctors' Medicare rates. The director of the Congressional Budget Office, Doug Elmendorf, will testify about the report before the House Budget Committee tomorrow morning on C-SPAN 3 at 10 Eastern.
Mr. Alexander.
One of the senators that we can see there on the Senate floor is Joseph Lieberman of Connecticut. He's the sponsor of what's pending here in the Senate called the Stock Act. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton just finished speaking a short time ago before the UN Security Council, saying that action to end the violence in Syria would be different from UN efforts to pacify Libya. The Associated Press writes that Russia says it worries that a draft measure aimed at Syria, currently before the Council, could lead to military action and regime change, just as an Arab-backed UN resolution led to NATO airstrikes in Libya that allowed rebels to topple Muammar Gaddafi. We covered Secretary Clinton's remarks, and we'll have them in our overnight programming here on C-SPAN 2, and you can also see them at cspan.org. On the Senate floor right now, the senators that are managing the bill on the floor here for the Stock Act are Susan Collins, Joe Lieberman, and Scott Brown. They all appear to be on the floor talking to other members and some staff members there. Congressional Quarterly writes that Majority Leader Reid's decision not to limit amendments could portend a lengthy floor process for the legislation. The Associated Press writes that a Republican super political committee and its nonprofit arm say they've raised $51 million this year in an effort to defeat President Obama. The American Crossroads Super PAC is among the first groups whose finances are being reported today. Those so-called super PACs have until midnight tonight to file their reports to the Federal Election Commission. Our live coverage of the Florida primary begins tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern, with candidate speeches and your comments by phone, Facebook, and Twitter. Here's how the Associated Press is writing about the bill that's pending here in the Senate. Some members of Congress want to include executive branch employees in a bill that would ban lawmakers from using non-public information to make stock trades. The bill would also require public reporting of new securities transactions within 30 days, all part of an effort by Congress to boost its approval ratings that are now in the teens. House Majority Leader Eric Cantor told reporters that if the bill now before the Senate is not expanded to include the executive branch, he would add that provision to the bill, expected to receive a House vote sometime in February.
Madam President.
The Senator from Massachusetts.
Thank you, Madam President. I ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Thank you. As you know, people are coming down requesting amendments be brought up, and since I don't see any Democrats offering any, I'd obviously defer to Senator Paul. He has an amendment. So I would to him.
The Senator from Kentucky.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent to set aside the pending amendment and call up amendment number 1490.
Is there objection?
Reserving the right to object. I have no objection.
To the filing.
To the filing of the amendment.
Without objection, so ordered. The clerk will report.
The Senator from Kentucky, Mr. Paul, proposes amendment number 1490 to amendment number 1470.
I ask unanimous consent that the reading of the amendment be waived.
Without objection.
This amendment will address some of the situations that are concerning the American people. I think the ability to serve in the Senate is a great honor. The ability to serve in the House of Representatives is a great honor. But I am somewhat sickened and somewhat saddened by people who use their office, who leave office and become lobbyists, who leave office and call themselves historians, but basically leave office and peddle the friendships that they have found here and the relationships to make money. Now, I think it's hard to prevent people from being lobbyists, but I think if people choose to leave the Senate and leave the House of Representatives and become lobbyists, they should give up something. These people are making millions of dollars lobbying Congress. I think maybe they should give up their pension. Maybe they should give up the health benefits that are subsidized by the taxpayer. If you're going to use your position as an ex-senator or as an ex-congressman to enrich yourself, maybe you should have to give up some of those perks that you accumulated while in office. So this amendment would say that if you go out and become a lobbyist, you have to give up your pension and you have to give up your health benefits and you need to pay for them yourselves. I think this is the least we can ask. And I think we've got a great deal of coverage now talking about people who are either lobbyists or not, or whether they're historians. The bottom line is we have a lot of people peddling their friendship and their influence for monetary gain, and I don't think the taxpayers should be subsidizing that. Thank you, and I yield back the remainder of my time.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
We continue to expect senators to come to the floor to offer their amendments to the Stock Act. The Associated Press writes that lawmakers say they've reached an agreement on a $63 billion four-year bill to extend the Federal Aviation Administration's operating authority. The House Transportation Infrastructure Committee said in a statement that the bill provides the long-term stable funding the FAA needs as it transitions from an air traffic control system that's based on World War II-era technology to one based on GPS technology. A temporary extension of the FAA's operating authority expires on February 17th. The Senate is debating a measure that would ban insider trading by members of Congress and their staffs. More work on that bill is expected tomorrow. U.S. News and World Report writes that alarming news came from the Congressional Budget Office today. The economy is on track to grow by only 1.1% next year, with unemployment climbing to 9.2%. That is, if Congress does nothing. Under current law, a bevy of tax breaks, such as the temporary payroll tax cut, will expire in the coming months and years. The director of the CBO, Douglas Elmendorf, held a briefing today to talk about their report.
Going forward.
We do. So there's summary data on the economic forecast in Chapter 2, and then year-by-year tables in Appendix E, if you look on pages 128 and 129. So we show the average of the unemployment rate in each year over the coming decade. And we expect that to decline slowly, principally because of slow growth in the demand for goods and services, and thus slow growth in businesses' need for employees to produce the goods and services they're selling. In addition to the limitations on the demand for workers, we think the unemployment rate is also being held up by some structural factors, mismatches between the available workers and available jobs, the